I've gotta agree with Yelena on this one. Pockets are kind of a big deal. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 24th film in the MCU, Marvel's 2021 espionage superhero film, Black Widow. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. Black Widow stars Scarlett Johansson, Florence Pugh, David Harbour, and Rachel Weisz, and was directed by Cate Shortland. Set after the events of Captain America Civil War, it focuses on Black Widow, played by Scarlett Johansson, who must confront the events and people of her dubious past in order to prevent a far larger future threat. Well, after the longest gap between MCU films since the release of Iron Man 2 in 2010, we finally got our Black Widow solo movie. And I think most people can agree that this is a film that should have come out long before now. She's one of the core original Avengers in the MCU, but along with Hawkeye, always kind of got pushed aside when it came to the movies. Most of the remaining members of the core team, other than the Hulk, each got 3 solo films, and we had other characters, like Spider-Man, Ant-Man, and the Guardians of the Galaxy, get 2 movies before Black Widow ever got 1. And then, of course, there's the added oddity of having this film come out after the events of Endgame, and all that entails for this character. While I think Black Widow probably deserved a movie back during the second phase of the MCU, this movie, without question, should have come out some point in the interim between Civil War and Infinity War. Instead, Black Widow is being used as the kickoff film for Phase 4 of the MCU, which is certainly a choice, given that the film is set several years prior to the end of Phase 3. And that introduces this interesting temporal challenge for the film, because we already know what's to come for this character. So, in essence, this film is a link between existing movies. It's filling in something that already happened that we just didn't see. And because of that, it can't really provide any significant plot progression for the franchise, because it's bound by these known start and end points. Instead, it's a film that has to focus on character. We finally get some real insight into Natasha's past, and that, combined with the character-building elements of this film's present, helps to form a more well-rounded picture of this character, and changes how you view certain things about her from Infinity War and Endgame. A huge part of this character development is related to family, and so this film additionally serves as an introduction to a number of new to the MCU characters. On one hand, this kind of takes some of the focus away from Black Widow, but thematically, it was necessary, and I have to say I really enjoyed this entire group of characters and their whole dysfunctional pseudo-family thing. I'll admit that based on the trailer, I was a little hesitant about David Harbour's character, Alexei. He very much seemed like he was going to be one of those purely comedic, butt-of-the-joke characters. And he certainly is a very comedic character, but he never got irritating to me, and there's more to him than I expected. I also thought Rachel Weisz's Melina was really good. That's a character that has quite a bit more nuance than Alexei, which works well for the character and many of the situations that arise in the film. But she's also not without humor, and she's got some very funny, dryly delivered one-liners. But when it comes to the family at the core of this film, Florence Pugh's Yelena steals the show. Honestly, when it comes to the movie as a whole, Yelena steals the show. That's not to discount Natasha in this movie, but you could argue that this is just as much Yelena's film, maybe even more so. She was definitely my favorite character here. Pugh was able to bring this excellent balance to the character. She's very believable and effective as this highly trained killer, but she's also extremely damaged by her past and delivers some of the most impactful and poignant emotional moments of the film. But she also manages to be incredibly funny and entertaining. She's super sarcastic, but in a very playful way that never comes across feeling mean. She and Natasha have some very entertaining banter throughout the film, and the sisterly chemistry is just palpable and probably my favorite thing about this movie. Another aspect of this film that I really enjoyed was the action. Now, admittedly, I always tend to have a pretty good time with the action sequences in MCU movies. I especially like sequences that are a little bit more grounded. I mean, it's fun to see people flying around battling aliens with their superpowers, but I tend to think that characters who don't have powers are a little more interesting to watch, and that's mostly what we get here. There's some nice hand-to-hand combat, some cool chase sequences, rescues, escapes, you name it. The third act does get a bit CGI heavy, but that's pretty much a given with these films at this point. And while it's a little intense for characters without superpowers, it never quite reaches the levels of third act insanity that we've become accustomed to. One thing that really surprised me about Black Widow was the underlying darkness of it all. I mean, the MCU's gotten pretty dark at times. Thanos and the snap and all that is pretty intense, but most of the darkness we've seen before feels very comic booky. You know, an alien snapping half of life out of existence could only exist in a comic book or movie. This film is slightly more grounded in the real world and things that could and have happened, so the darker tone somehow feels more ominous. This is still an MCU movie, so the darkness is definitely buried under a lot of humor and glossiness, but it's there and peeks through at times. The opening title sequence, with its acoustic cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit and semi-disturbing Cold War spy training montage sequence, a la the opening of The Americans, sets this darker tone. And the movie incorporates a lot of things related to obedience and control and various chemical subjugation methods. It even directly makes reference to involuntary sterilization and alludes to some heavier, darker stuff. But again, it is the MCU, so there are always jokes to deflect us and prevent us from ever diving too deep, but that darkness is definitely under it all, for better or worse. Partly due to that darkness, and partly due to the spy-centric nature of the story, this movie does feel a bit different from many of the other MCU films. It's got elements of the Winter Soldier to it with the action thriller storyline, but it also draws heavily on the Bond franchise. In fact, we get a direct reference to that with a character briefly watching Moonraker of all of the Bond movies. I guess From Russia with Love would have been a little too on the nose. But despite its influences and attempts to be different within the MCU, the plot of Black Widow never really stands out. It's not bad, but it's not great either. There were some issues related to the villains, and more than a few moments where I wish the film had chosen to do something other than the obvious, but it still functioned well as a vehicle for our main characters, which is really what this movie's about. So, should Black Widow have been released years ago? Absolutely. Is it too late for a Black Widow movie now? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that this film is not what it should have or could have been. It is clearly hamstrung by its late release. If it had come out in the interim between Civil War and Infinity War, it could have been used to progress the plot of the Infinity Saga, while also serving the character of Black Widow. Instead, this long-deserved solo film is largely relegated to the role of filler. It's kind of given to us as an, oh, by the way, this happened back then and you just didn't know about it, but here you go. In a way, the lack of intricate dependency on other films in the franchise is kind of refreshing, and results in an almost standalone film. But at the same time, it also kind of feels like a slight. So yes, Black Widow is too late to have the impact that it should have had. But no, it's not so late that it's irrelevant. This film definitely sets up for things to come in the MCU, and it adds some layers to Natasha that now allow us to interpret her role in other movies slightly differently. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is easily Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova. She was by far the standout character of this movie, which really surprised me. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Florence Pugh, so I didn't come in doubting her acting abilities. I just didn't expect to like this character as much as I did. She was extremely entertaining and had some of the best jokes and one-liners of the film, but she also imbued a ton of heart and emotion to the story, which kind of touches on some of the underlying darkness of the film. There's a really impressive scene for her at a dinner table, and she's also got excellent chemistry with Johansson's Natasha. The second pro is the action. Although it might not be the greatest action film I've ever seen, it's still really enjoyable and very solid within the MCU. With the exception of the CGI-heavy third act, it definitely draws more inspiration from the action of espionage thrillers like the Mission Impossible franchise or James Bond than it does from other MCU films. There's some really good hand-to-hand fight choreography, and while I wish it wasn't quite as choppy with its editing, I enjoyed those fights more than most of the superpower-centric ones of other films in the franchise. On the con side, the biggest issue is how hamstrung this film is. And I guess it's kind of unfair to consider that as a con for the film, because it's really more of an MCU franchise con, or I guess even a studio decision con, but it certainly has a negative effect on the film. It's clear that this movie couldn't be what it wanted to be, from a couple standpoints. This film has some very dark elements to it, and it's obvious that they were reined in and buried quite a bit. That's not surprising, it is the MCU, but this would have been a very different movie if those elements were allowed to come to the surface more. Likewise, this could have been a very different story had it come out at the time that it's set. It could have had a more impactful plot had it been developed first and allowed to determine the direction of the franchise rather than just be stuck in between already existing movies after the fact. The second con is something I'm a little more torn on, and that's Taskmaster. So if you've been following my superhero movie reviews over the years, you know that I don't read comics, and so my knowledge of various characters is almost exclusively from the movies. And this is the first theatrical appearance of this character. I will say that this isn't an entirely new to me character, though. I have a tiny bit of experience with Taskmaster thanks to the PS4 Spider-Man game, so I knew the basics of their abilities, but not anything backstory related. But even without that knowledge, a certain thing about the character in this movie, that I'm not going to spoil here, seemed off. And after I got home from the movie, I had to look it up to see if this really is the deal with this character, and it's not. Now, obviously tons of things are different between the comics and movies, and that's fine. And even this change has some thematic weight to it that's in line with other elements of the movie, but I just don't know about it. And that's coming from somebody who has no pre-existing investment in this character. I really liked the fight scenes with Taskmaster, but everything else? Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Black Widow or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Black Widow 3.5 out of 5 paws. This film is certainly hampered by its belated release, but the entertaining new characters, action, and family dynamics make for another solid MCU outing. It's a high 3.5 for me, so I wouldn't be surprised if it eventually jumps to 4 paws on rewatch. I would recommend Black Widow, most obviously to fans of the MCU. It's more than a little late, and might not be the Black Widow film that we or Natasha deserved, but it's still a nice character-building movie to link Civil War and Infinity War. So MCU fans will find plenty to like about it, but I will say that if you're a little disenchanted by the way MCU films tend to play out at this point, you might be pleasantly surprised by this one. It still has its MCU-isms, but it does feel a bit different. And if you're somebody who's overwhelmed by the MCU, who just can't or doesn't want to watch all of the movies, and so often feels lost or confused by the level of interconnectedness among the films, this might be one for you. It certainly connects to Civil War and Infinity War, but they aren't necessary for understanding the film. And it has the ability to act as kind of a rare standalone film within the franchise, barring the post-credit scene. If you liked Black Widow, I would recommend Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Although the MCU is made up of a bunch of superhero movies, there's definitely some variation within the franchise when it comes to genre. There are some that are more comedic, more dramatic, more sci-fi infused, and when it comes to that secondary genre, Winter Soldier, with its spy thriller roots, is definitely the next closest thing to Black Widow. If you're interested in the connections this film has to other franchise entries, you should watch Captain America: Civil War, because not only does it establish the mindset of Natasha in this film, but it also has some parallels with the family themes seen here. And if you want to reach outside of the MCU, you might want to check out Salt, which is another female-fronted espionage thriller. And I have one more bonus recommendation for you. I usually only recommend films here, but I would be remiss not to suggest The Americans. It's an excellent TV show that focuses on a family of Soviet sleeper agents during the Cold War, and has a lot of overlap with elements of this movie. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Black Widow? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, do you think a Black Widow movie would have been successful earlier in the franchise? Why or why not? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.